What is the greatest commandment? Everybody should be able to know that immediately. What is the greatest commandment? Jump in, whoever's ready.
Love Jesus with all your heart, soul, and mind, and whatever else I can't remember.
And
That
strength.
it?
And strength, that's right.
And strength, okay.
Yeah. And when Jesus was asked about the great commandment, there was no hesitation. It wasn't a matter of debate. This was clearly the most important command, to love God. And he said the second's like it. He said it's to love your neighbor as yourself. So those are the greatest commandment, and the one that is very similar to it. And then Jesus gave the new commandment in John chapter 13, where he said, the new commandment is to love one another as I have loved you. For there to be such an emphasis on love in the family of God, I think that there's not always a good understanding of what love means. And along those lines, I'm concerned about the many things that I think can endanger love. In fact, I think love is endangered today, and we're going to be talking about the things that can endanger love. But I wanted to remind us, as we're talking about intimacy and sexuality within marriage, that it's supposed to spring from love. And in order for that to happen and be effective, there needs to be, I think, a proper understanding of what love is. So that leads us into question number one tonight. As relational beings, we can confuse feelings, hormones, and desire for love. So here's my question tonight. What is infatuation, and how is infatuation different from love? First of all, just by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the term infatuation? Raise your hand if you're okay. Everybody who I can see anyways, familiar with the term. So what's the difference between love and infatuation?
In this context, infatuation is short-lived, and love is supposed to be long-lasting.
In fact, what Paul said about love, a Christ-like love in 1 Corinthians 13, is that it never fails. So you're making one of the important distinctions, that infatuation is short-lived and love never ends, it continues. Another difference.
Dale, I've always thought that infatuation was a like. You know, I like somebody.
Okay.
Might not be a strong like, but a lot of times that goes into infatuation of, well, yeah, this is a good person.
What I hear in your words, Jim, are infatuation's more on the surface and love is deeper.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
He
What
was
else?
infatuated first.
What's that?
I said he was infatuated with me first.
He was infatuated first, but when he got to know you, of course,
Yeah.
that took care of the love immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
The way I remember it from years ago is that it's infatuation is more being in love with the idea of being in love.
Who told you that?
Some wise guy
Some real wise teacher in the past?
during our premarital counseling.
Okay, so here's some of the other differences. And here's what's so hard about it. Infatuation mimics the feelings of love. Let me say that again. Infatuation mimics the feelings of love, but infatuation is self-focused. All right? Infatuation, as Laurie said, is being in love with the thought of being in love. So love seeks to give. Infatuation seeks to get. Love, as Josh pointed out, is enduring. Infatuation will eventually burn out. Love will build a friendship. Infatuation will seek to get physical quickly. And so there's a confusing infatuation with love. Many people give their hearts, and you remember in our first class session, we talked about the importance of protecting our hearts. So some people give their hearts and their bodies or pieces of themselves during this feeling of infatuation. They give themselves to people who that relationship will have a flame to it maybe for a while, but then it fizzles out. It's one of the things, just sharing out, I didn't tell Laurie that I was going to share this, but she's given me permission. She trusts me. When we started dating and Laurie was getting ready to go off to college, I told her, I said, if you want to go to college and you want to date, I want you to do that. Because I didn't want her later on, 33 years later, where we are now, and say, wow, I missed out on all the good stuff. I missed out on, dating when I was in college, and I didn't want her to feel that way. I didn't want her to be captured by infatuation. And so I wanted to give her that option. Now she didn't choose that option. She was a very smart woman in that way. But I didn't want her to get confused between love and infatuation. So I hope that that's helped distinguish the two a little bit. And I think that's important to understand in our world that gets confused. So how would you help someone who is in love with infatuation? How would you help them see that infatuation is not the real deal? Yeah, ponder that one for a little bit. Anybody got an answer? Yeah.
I was guessing myself because I was rereading the question and I thought, did I answer it? Anyway, so this may not be the right answer, but I guess asking about what substantiates the love and about the motivation for it, and kind of directing towards not like you said, what are you going to get, but what are you willing to endure for this person? And hypotheticals like, what if this happens? What if this person gets sick? How do you project you would react in that situation?
Andrea, that's such a good answer. It's such a rational answer. But here's the problem. We're not talking about something that's rational. And that's what I want to point out as we talk about this. I don't know that you can help someone once they think that they're in love, to see it rationally. In fact, what we're more familiar with probably is perhaps parents are able to see through things. And what ends up happening is often it leads to a conflict between parents and children over the validity of their being in love. So many of the youthful love songs are about this feeling that I can't fight anymore, that feels so right, it can't be wrong. I mean, those are some of the lyrics. I remember them even from my own teenage days. And and my, it was just tugged at my own heartstrings eons ago, like it was. And so it feels so strong that there's the assumption that because I feel it strongly, it must be real. That's why, again, I'm not sure how successful that we can be with talking to someone rationally about it. I think it needs to be part of a conversation early with our children about what difference it makes, or what the difference is between infatuation and love. Because when they get those hormones and those desires and that feeling going, it's hard to rationalize with that. And so start early talking about relationships and dating. Without that, I think people often have to learn the hard way. So what I want to encourage, what I encouraged with my own children, is to press for communication, not commitment. Help couples talk more. As we talked about in one of the earlier classes, build friendship. You don't have to become boyfriend, girlfriend. You don't have to press this relationship to be something serious. And I think, again, in our insecure world, oftentimes people feel pressed to do that early in their relationship without allowing it to blossom, which is, we talked about blossoming love last week. Tonight, we're talking about protecting love in the Song of Solomon. So does anybody have a question or comment before we move to the Song of Songs?
Dale, I was just thinking about a conversation that Andrew and I had last year, and I don't remember how the question came up, but we pondered who in a relationship often says that they're in love first. I love you first. And I said, well, I think it's got to be the female. Andrew said, I disagree. And so, of course, they looked it up, and as usual, she was correct. And, it's often the male that says, I love you first. And it kind of speaks to what you're saying here, but it's not so much about actual love. It's about the feelings and emotions, and then that physical desire that they have. And so they're more likely to say that they're in love, even though that may not actually be true. It brings this to mind.
Yeah, good. That's good stuff. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Question or comment? Okay, let's jump in the Song of Songs tonight. We're actually only going to share a few verses from the Song of Songs that talks about protecting love. But we're going to be reading quite a bit from Proverbs, probably not all that I have listed here, but I hope that you will at some point read all that I have listed, because it's pretty interesting what Solomon says in Proverbs about the adulteress. But somebody read verse 14 of Song of Songs, chapter 2.
I've got it.
Okay.
Oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely.
Okay. You remember the time that Moses asked to know God? And God said, I'm going to tuck you away in the cleft of the rock, because you can't see my face, but when I pass by, I'll let you see me in that way. In a sense, God was hiding Moses from seeing God's face. And so the language here is really of kind of a playful hiding that's going on. Lover is pursuing beloved, and And she's kind of playing a game of hide and seek with her. So there's a teasing playfulness in the relationship between beloved and lover as she hides. But he wants to see her and hear her. Love is meant to be playful and enjoyable. If love becomes overly possessive, that's not very fun anymore. Sexual love, in particular within marriage, is meant to be the uninhibited play of the little boy within the husband and the little girl within the wife. Some people have speculated that the Garden of Eden was a sexual playground for Adam and Eve. What are some practical ways that a couple can enjoy this playfulness? What are some practical ways that a couple can enjoy this playfulness? And remember that this is in the context of protecting love. Anybody want to jump on that?
I like to. Oh.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Andrea.
Okay.
I think Laurie's glad that you saved her.
Well, she probably has. I want to hear her answer too. I like to hide and jump out at Trent whenever, like, hide around the corner. And so whenever it said hide, that reminded me of that because I like to do that too. But like flirting like children do, I guess, is kind of the thing. Like tickling and like tickle tag. And when I hate being tickled, like I just hate it so much, but it's still fun to like pretend or like tease, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of like it when Trent teases me, not when he actually tickles me though.
Very good. So the flirtation is a great way to make love playful. She wanted to hear your answer. I'm curious what you're going to say.
That honestly, the flirting was the first thing I thought of too. Josh is laughing there. I think sometimes when you flirt when you're dating, and you even just dating, going out, times when you get married, sometimes that stops, and that's sad. And it
well, that was flirting. That's what that was.
I found a little thing the other day. It was cute. It said, I didn't really know how to flirt, so I don't really know how to flirt, so I'll just stare at you till you marry me. So that was probably me when we got married. But just keeping it alive, being playful, little playful comments. I love winks. I remember when we were dating and he was the youth minister, and I would go to all the youth group activities so that I could see him, and we wouldn't usually interact with each other at these events because he was working, but if he would sit across the table, if he would wink at me, and I would just melt. And I still like it.
So flirtation, and part of the joyfulness of flirtation is that it usually triggers laughter. And laughter and enjoying one another in a humorous way is physically, sexually stimulating. And so that's a very good way. Flirtation. What other things can couples do? Let me share with you then some things that I would recommend. Number one is talk openly about sex. A couple needs to feel comfortable talking to one another about what makes each one feel good and what each one may not like. One of the things I encourage premarital couples to do is to have that kind of conversation. In fact, we try to have pretty frank conversations as part of premarital counseling, just to make that a common experience to talk about sexuality. Make dates and appointments. One of the neat things about setting a date is that anticipation is exciting. So if I know I've got something to look forward to, you may be married and you may get in a habit of kind of taking each other for granted. But if you say, hey, Friday night, would you like to go out? That creates some anticipation, which is an exciting thing, and can help a couple. Also, I wonder if the mistaken view of sex as being dirty keeps some people from enjoying the playfulness of it. I just want to reiterate very strongly that I believe that God created sex to be a playful experience between a husband and wife, the little boy, the little girl, and that it is so nourishing to the relationship. It's not just nourishing to the relationship, it's nourishing to each of the individuals. That little boy and that little girl feel important and treasured in the midst of that. And so it's very nourishing as an individual. It's very nourishing for the relationship. And I think couples who have been, and this leads kind of into the next question, I think individuals and couples who have been taught that sex is dirty and they feel awkward enjoying the playfulness of it, miss out on something that is very enriching to their relationship. And so I hope that I have made that point strongly enough tonight, because I think it's a very important point that couples nourish their relationship through the playfulness of sex. Comments or questions? What? I don't know what you're thinking about, so I'm a little scared about that. So
I was asking if something's safe to say, but I think it is. I think one of the things that I did one time was I was just thinking about this, the whole sexuality thing is, it's a very sensual thing. And so I found this idea for, I think for an anniversary idea of finding things to stimulate all the senses. So find something that maybe even blindfold him, but let him feel something, let him smell something, just all the different things to stimulate the senses. I thought that was kind of a neat thing.
yeah, sex is meant to be a sensual thing, and so engage the senses. It is a stimulating thing. All right.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
All right. So basically what you're saying is that there's a balance to sexuality and sex, that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the way you view it, your views can be bad, right? It's just a balance.
Well, let me see if I can say it very plainly. Sexuality outside of marriage is prohibited by God for a good reason. And the reason is because it affects sex within marriage. And so God's prohibition is not to steal our fun. God's prohibition is to protect the gift that he's given. Within marriage, Josh, a couple should feel free to enjoy their sexual relationship as fully as they want, as long as there is no other person that intrudes on it visually or literally physically. And a couple should feel the freedom to fully enjoy that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, wonderful thing, God-given thing, and so enjoyed to the fullest within marriage.
And it can go throughout your lifetime into older years. I can remember being a kid and the idea of thinking that my parents still engaged in sex was, couldn't imagine that, but that was a very false thinking. And then being that age now, I'm thankful that was a false way of thinking.
Well, there are couples and individuals who have sex, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the study, actually, into their 80s, 90s. I don't know what there is research-wise about couples in their hundreds, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Okay, so we'll talk about that some more later. Somebody read verse 15 for us.
I'll get it here.
Okay.
Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom.
All right. Now, foxes, this is not familiar language to me, but it would have been familiar language perhaps to the people who were first reading this. Foxes eat the early blossoms of budding plants to keep those plants from maturing. And so that's what the poet here is referring to. The way that something's in blossom, and it's from the blossom that the fruit grows. But a fox comes and he eats the blossom, so there's no fruit that's produced. So here's the question. The foxes refer to threats to their blossoming love. What potential threats are there to love in relationships? What potential threats are there to love in relationships? Come on, there are lots of them.
Maybe family, children.
How so? How could family be a threat?
Because you let, like with children, sometimes you let the child take over and consume all your energy, and you don't have anything left for your partner.
That's great. And that happens in many young couples with young children. This is probably a good time to remind Andrea and Trent, as Andrea is with child, about how important it is to protect your relationship even after the child comes. And that's a challenge because the child is so needy. But you'll need to in fact, since you mentioned that, and I'm really glad that you did, Jency, I had a psychologist friend of mine ask it to me this way. He said, we were talking about our relationship and our children were very young at the time. And he said, do you feel like you lost your girlfriend? And I'd never thought about what it felt like. And I thought, that's exactly what it feels like. That's exactly what it feels like. I lost my girlfriend. She became a mother. And so that can feel like a threat to the relationship. What else is a potential threat to the relationship, love relationship, that keeps it from blossoming?
I think the focus being on the self is a huge temptation, and I really have to work on this because it's not something I ever realized before I got married that I'm selfish, but I am, and neglecting covenant love in pursuit of things that I want, and sometimes I don't even announce those expectations. I just kind of have them, and kind of hold Trent to that. But if I'm more focused on what will do him good and what he desires and needs, then love will blossom. But if I'm focused on myself, then it's really hard for it to.
That's a great one. Selfish expectations are a tremendous danger, especially when they're unspoken. Because all of a sudden not only do you have these selfish expectations of your spouse, your spouse doesn't know that. And so it can be a very threatening thing to the relationship. Just for the sake of time, let me mention a couple more because I want to have a little time to get into the Proverbs. Promiscuity, lust can be a threat to love. You'll remember the story, and I think we're going to talk about it later in the class, of Amnon and Tamar, the half brother, half sister of one another, one of David's children, how Amnon raped his sister. The Bible says that he loved her. He was consumed with love for her until he raped her. And then the Bible says he hated her more than he had loved her. Well, that's not love. That's lust. And so it became a threat to love blossoming. The physicality alters one's ability to see correctly. So lust or promiscuity can threaten the blossoming of love. One's community can threaten, and this is where family comes in a little bit, as Jency pointed out. Community can be very supportive of love and the blossoming of love, but sometimes there's a pressure put on blossoming relationships that actually threatens the relationship. Expecting it to move along more quickly, or pressure to not see one another. Those can be threats to love. Josh, something you said earlier, mistaken ideas about relationships can be threats to love. Bad information that a couple has to overcome. In the context of the Song of Songs, the king and other men who are bent on conquest, who aren't interested in love, they're interested on how many women they can count that they have been with. That's a threat to love. Remember again that beloved is property of the king. She's part of the harem. And so love cannot blossom when it's simply about personal gratification, whatever form that it takes, whether it's selfish expectations that Andrea talked about, or it's lust, or it's pressure from the community. Love cannot blossom when it's simply about personal gratification. No wonder he says, be careful about catch the foxes that spoil the vineyards. That's what this is all about. Let's get rid of the things that threaten the blossoming of the love. All right? Let's move now for a couple of minutes to the Proverbs. We're not going to read all these verses, but let's pick out a few select verses. Somebody read Proverbs 2:16 through 19 to begin with.
Wisdom will save you also from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words, who has left the partner of her youth and ignored the covenant she made before God. Surely her house leads down to death, and her paths to the spirits of the dead. None who go to her return or attain the paths of life.
Okay, remember as we're reading this in the context of protecting love. And one of the things we're learning just from the first passage that Trent read for us is that the adulteress is a threat to love. All right, chapter 5, somebody read 15 through 20 rather than the whole chapter. You got that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Drink water from your own cistern, water flowing from your own well. Should your springs flow in the streets, streams of water in the public squares? They should be for you alone and not for you to share with strangers. Let your fountain be blessed and take pleasure in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful fawn, let her breast always satisfy you, be lost in her love forever. Why, my son, would you be infatuated with a forbidden woman or embrace the breast of a stranger?
Okay, the language early in that passage, verses 15 through 17, about cisterns and water, he's talking about the relationship of a husband and wife, and that it should be exclusive, and that you drink from your own cistern. You don't go and drink from another man's cistern. You don't engage another man's husband, or another man's wife, or another woman's husband. You give yourself fully to your own spouse, is what he's talking about here. Chapter 6, verses 20 through 29. My son, keep your father's commandment and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. For the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. There are consequences, Solomon points out, to flirtation with or engaging with the adulteress. And then finally, chapter 7, somebody read verses 24 through 27, please.
Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death.
Okay, if we'd have read early verses in chapter 7, he talks about this kind of naive young man who's just walking down the street, and this seductress is over there, and she's probably dressed seductively, and so that captures his attention. And rather than walk by, he lets her talk to him for a while, and all of a sudden she has him hooked. And so there's warning here. I find it fascinating how many times in these first few chapters of the Proverbs, in these first few chapters of this wisdom book, that Solomon talks about the dangers of the adulteress. That's very, very noteworthy, I think, because I think he recognizes how vulnerable young men and old men alike are. So, in these passages, a concerned father is teaching his sons about the dangers of the adulteress. Perhaps if he was speaking to his daughters, he would offer similar advice to them about the dangers of the adulterer. How can these words apply to our lives today and the lives of our sons and daughters? What application do you see here? I have to tell you, to begin with, I wonder if Solomon ever read his own words. You know, Solomon seemed to have a do as I say, not as I do philosophy. At least that's the way he lived it out anyway. But what practical, what application do you see here?
I think one of the most important parts, and that's continually harped upon, is to be wise and to kind of know where we're going. Because if we don't, like the young man who was wandering around, he didn't have a clear destination. He wasn't focused on where he was going, so he was strayed. And I think, you know, we don't need to be found in places where temptation can have more power than it should. And we can position ourselves so that, you know, that we have a better chance of getting past it. And then another thing about wisdom is that children can't be wise without someone training them. And so for younger people, and, you know, we should be seeking the help of those who are older than us. And then also, you know, as we become the elders, we should be willing to train up the younger ones.
That's very good, Andrea. In fact, if we had read the entirety of Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7, one of the things that comes out several times is the young man says, I hated discipline. In other words, what he's saying is, because I did not allow discipline to teach me, I found myself in these situations where I succumbed to the temptation because I wasn't disciplined enough. And so discipline is a great blessing in our lives. And so highlighting the importance of discipline is one of the things that Andrea talked about. What else? What other applications do you see?
Just to kind of go on Andrea's point and your point, Mr. Mannon, when you talk about discipline, also humility. I had a teacher in high school that I had a girlfriend I thought I was in love with, and he not so kindly put it that, oh, well, you're probably going to have another girlfriend by the end of the, or, you know, she's probably going to break up with you by the end of the year. And sure enough, he was right. But, you know, just the humility to know that I myself can sometimes be the adulteress in a way, just by being prideful, like what you said earlier, trying to get as many women as you can, or it becoming a contest or some sort of game. So anyway, just humbleness.
That's good. Humility is it's important to have humility in combating any kind of sin in our lives. And what these passages point out is that any of us and all of us are vulnerable, particularly under these circumstances. When we are tired, when we are lonely, when we are hurting, or when we are hungry. Under those circumstances, we are particularly vulnerable to the adulteress or vulnerable to sexual temptations. And so no one is beyond those temptations that often start as emotional bonds and then move toward the physical. It's a curious thing, and perhaps all of us deal with it. There's something that attracts people to the dangers of sin. I don't know if it's the adrenaline rush or the fantasy that an adulterous situation creates, but people who find themselves caught in the sin of adultery are living an illusion, a scripted illusion, because in adulterous relationships, you don't have to deal with real things like kids and car payments and washing dishes and acne and bad breath and all that kind of stuff. It's not real life. And so we can find ourselves vulnerable to that, especially in those moments when there's a sense of fatigue and loneliness and hurt and hunger. So I hope that that's helpful to us. Any comments or questions about that?
I just wanted to say that, I mean, I feel like that could have been written now. I mean, it's just as applicable now as it was when it was written thousands of years ago, but working at a high school, happened to work at the same high school Josh went to, and seeing, you know, the young ladies now, and the kids weren't married, so it wasn't adultery from that sense, but just the, you know, the aggressive nature of young ladies and provocative dress and language. Just I came across a book called Aggressive Girls, Clueless Boys. Got a lot of helpful tips out of that. We had a lot of boys in our home, so we always talked
Clueless
very
ones,
open.
by the
We
way.
had some clueless ones. But fortunately, most of them listened and hopefully learned. And but we had some pretty open and honest conversations about dating and relationships. And again, just nothing was ever off limits. No question was ever shamed. I mean, we just wanted to
They
prepare
could
them.
ask whatever they wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. This is probably what you're going to be faced with, and just how to be prepared for it when it happens.
And let me say here, because we were kind of making fun of our sons. If you all had known me as a teenage boy, you would have said, "There's one of those clueless guys." One of the reasons I love teaching material like this, especially to teenagers and young adults, is because nobody ever had these conversations with me. So I was clueless. I didn't know what was going on. And I think understanding some of these things can save people a lot of heartache, and help them in their walk with God to walk faithfully and courageously. But you know, I made mistakes relationally as a teenager and young adult, because one, because I'm fleshly, and two, because nobody ever had these conversations with me. Okay, so it's a you know, it's a delight to be able to share this. Any comments or questions? Verses 16 and 17, Song of Songs, chapter 2. Somebody read those two verses.
My beloved is mine, and I am his. He grazes among the lilies, until the day breathes and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the cleft mountains.
Okay, now, if you just took those words and you read them quite literally and didn't understand the context, that seems pretty benign and pretty harmless in language. But lilies and vineyards are euphemisms for the excited use of their bodies in sexual activity. Mountains and hills are references to her breasts. Is their candid erotic talk godly or ungodly? And explain. What do you think? And we're not to the most erotic part of the book yet, so we're going to see much more descriptiveness than this. Is this godly or ungodly for them to talk to each other this way? Yes. There's a marital relationship, and we will talk about that later. Laurie asked me, are they married at this point?
Because that makes a big difference.
Yes, it does. And let me just say this as you're thinking about the answer. I read these verses to Laurie and talked about the poetic language, the erotic language that was here. And she said, and I told Laurie, I said, she's really hot for him. And Laurie said, that doesn't sound very nice. And I asked Laurie, were you hot for me? And she just kind of grinned and wouldn't answer my question. Here's the deal, okay? Here's the deal. God, again, created us as sexual beings with strong feelings. It's natural and it's good within God's boundaries. They are one. This is Sex is God's wedding gift. Let me read to you what Paul wrote to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians 7, 4 and 5, to a church that was located in a city that just had messed up ideas about so many things. And one of those things was morality. And here's what Paul had to write to the Christians in Corinth. Notice and think about the application to husbands and wives. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations, unless, there are three things here. One, you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for 2, a limited time. So 3, you can give yourselves completely to prayer. So if a couple agrees, both of them agree for a period of time to refrain from sexual relations, to give themselves to prayer, they can refrain. But then he says, afterward, you should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Sex is meant to be routine and regular within the marriage relationship, unless those three conditions are met that Paul talks about here. Again, this is God's plan. So, what's your answer to my question? Is their language to one another godly or ungodly?
It's godly.
Why?
I think God formed us, so whenever we admire each other, we're admiring his work, and he formed us for relationship. So when we talk to each other, like he's, like they're talking here in this book, we develop closer relationship, and that's what he wants for us. And that points to, our relationship with him. And another thing I thought of is that all scripture is from God. It's God breathed. And so, we talked about earlier how there's that kind of controversy about whether this book should be included in the Bible, but it was, and God wanted it to be. So this language is therefore godly.
Very good. And so here's something that I wonder. I wonder how many people are tantalized by forbidden things because they don't have a healthy and godly outlet within their marriage. I'm going to say that again just for you to reflect on it. I wonder how many people are tantalized by forbidden things because they don't have a healthy and godly outlet within their marriage. To get more specific, I wonder if couples could have this kind of open flirtation and erotic talk with one another. I wonder if they would be as tempted outside of their relationship as some are, if they felt like they had this bonding within the relationship. I think sometimes, again, that the absence of that can make the temptation even stronger. So I will echo it again and again throughout this class that God intended for sex to be a nourishing, playful, bonding experience between a husband and his wife and the husband and wife should fully engage in that playfulness, bonding, and nourishing. Have I made myself clear enough in this class about that? I'm really trying hard to say that clearly. So I hope that's getting across. Well, it looks like we are at the end of our class time tonight. I thank you for your participation. It's always a joy to be with you each Wednesday night. And I hope it's blessing you. I hope it's blessing your current relationship, or in someone like Josh's case, future relationship, preparing for those times for that to be, godly in all aspects. So have a good rest of the week, and we will see you Sunday, and then see you again next Wednesday.